Greetings, Group 1. My name is Andrew Craig, and this week I'll be presenting you all a summary of Chapter 9, Knowing, from Skinner's book about behaviorism. This chapter is all about knowing or knowledge, and what does it mean to know, and what are the different points about knowledge. Skinner begins giving examples of some common phrases we use in regards to knowledge and behavior, discussing a newborn and how people will describe its actions as knowing how to do something, when in fact the newborn is simply doing behavior. They're just acting, reacting. This brings us to one of the odd implications of the language we use to talk about knowledge, and that is knowledge equals possession of behavior. Skinner underlines how this is problematic because behavior exists only when it's happening. So how can you have it? He explains further by giving an example about a person's immune system and how it possesses a system of special reactions in response to invading organisms. However, its responses don't exist until what we are actually talking about with knowing is a repertoire, what behavior people are capable of doing. The first subsection of the chapter talks about three different ways we talk about knowing. So we don't always mean the same thing when we're talking about knowing. The first one here is to be in contact or intimate with things such as sin or beauty. I know beauty, or I know that is beautiful. That is the first example. The second one is we say we know how to do something when we can do it. So not just simply we can do it, but we know how. The third is knowing about things. I know about another subject. We say I know about it. All kinds of knowing depend on a previous exposure to contingencies of the environment. The rest of the chapter really. This is also important because the next section talks about how knowledge comes from experience. So Skinner explains knowledge is derived from experience. Knowledge is due to more than just contact with the environment, though. It is due to of reinforcement involved in that setting. These contingencies allow for the consideration of the why shoulds listed in the book, the reasons behind contingencies. So in the book, it was talking about different, like, why should I attend to this aspect of my environment? The reinforcement that's going on is the answer to those questions. So the next section talks about knowledge as power, or how it can involve control. So operant behavior is the exercise of power. While acquiring knowledge for knowledge's sake is appealing to some, knowledge that is beneficial to improving the human condition is more prevalently reinforced by the environment. Skinner explains all knowledge consists of hypotheses regarded as proven or tentative, and our interactions with the environment shape those hypotheses. That's a lot of what our knowledge is. According to Skinner, we also talk about contemplation here, and what is that? Um, Behavior and contemplative knowledge are very linked, and this makes sense because oftentimes we say with contemplation that a speaker may be its own listener. It is kind of like you're having a conversation with yourself in your own head. So much of contemplative behavior works off the same mechanisms as verbal behavior, and that means that contemplative behavior is very automatically reinforced, very much automatically reinforced. So contemplation would be impossible without being exposed to reinforcement contingencies. Oftentimes when we're talking about knowing or knowledge, we talk about understanding something or coming to an understanding. So Skinner talks about understanding or coming to an understanding involving being able to repeat or repeat correctly some sort of input. When we talk about reading and rereading to better understand a writer, we are acquiring a stronger tendency to say what the writer is saying. However, there is a deeper level of understanding that Skinner goes into, and he talks about understanding involving knowing reasons. So he gives an example of throwing a switch and not receiving the reinforcement of the machine starting up and working. Um, this creates a sort of extension period, and during that time, the person is going to test out different contingencies to understand what went wrong with the machine. Why did it not? Why did the reinforcement not take place in the first place? Was it plugged in correctly, or was there some other problem? So we acquire understanding by analyzing the. We can take a very basic level of understanding, which might be rule governed, understanding the contingency shaping that's going on. Knowing often involves the possession of information, or even the transmission of information, or sending of a message between people. This is considered by people as being transfer between a sender and receiver. The way we use information to describe transmission between people is metaphorical, representing the transmission of input to output. The theory here is that the environment enters the body and is processed and then converted. Skinner gives an operant analysis, though, and he says that we do not need to follow this process as neither stimulus nor response is ever in the body. The next section is very important as we're going into a field of science, and Skinner talks about the special kind of knowledge scientist and science produces. The facts and laws of science are descriptions of the world to help understand the prevailing contingencies of reinforcement and make it possible for people to respond more successfully to the environment without gaining reinforcement that would otherwise take a long time to observe oneself. So basically, science provides people with the opportunity to, I guess, gain knowledge that would otherwise take a very long time to interact with the environment and gain the reinforcement to get that information. Science provides answers in a short form. Skinner spends a large portion of this section discussing by challenging the notion that because science starts with a single scientist, that science cannot be as objective as it claims. But the nature of science and the scientific method involves, it's kind of the answer there. Uh, so with science and the scientific method, this involves the communication of laws, facts, and findings to other colleagues, which testing or checking each other by attempting to use or replicate those laws, facts, and findings themselves. Um, this then creates or provides others the ability to respond effectively to the subject matter without prior experience. They create people to do that. The science and scientific knowledge is a sort of group consciousness that no longer involves simply the individual point of view of the original scientist. And that's all because of the process of nature of science. The last section is talking about isms. Isms are knowledge bases that account for large patterns of human, class, period, or cultural behavior. Skinner talks about a pragmatist, a proletariat, and a behaviorist as examples. These these ideas, these isms, classify behavior as having observable consequences under given situations. There's contingencies within behavior contingencies within these isms. So conflicts between isms are conflicts between the competing. Within these conflicts, behavior patterns generated by one set of contingencies creates the conditions for a different pattern of behavior. So one of these one of these isms can create the need for an opposite an opposing one. Skinner goes into this further by looking at Gilbert Murray's analysis of the transition to Christianity in the Roman Empire. Murray found that this human development involved conditions under which Christianity gained traction and its effect on the people who followed it. So he found contingencies within there. Was able to classify behavior that went along with that. And Murray, but Murray used feeling words and described very long behavioral terms. So Skinner went in and dissected contingencies like the lack of positive reinforcement or breakdowns in schedules of reinforcement. We often fall into the trap of using poetic language instead of exploring the more valuable information of the contingencies at work. Alright, so I have two questions for you guys in regards to the chapter. One is sort of about Skinner and understanding the reading itself, but it also is relevant this week because there was a section talking about understanding and writer. So I often find myself having trouble following along Skinner's trains of thought. Sometimes I read and I feel like I just get to the end and I feel like I get dropped off where it almost feels like the full thought has been completed. So I'm wondering what tips do you all have for better interpreting or understanding Skinner's writing style, or do you have some of the same difficulties? That's question one. Question two is I enjoyed the section on isms and the large patterns of behavioral contingencies at work. So more specifically, the conflicting contingencies between two isms. I want you guys to think of two conflicting isms and discuss what are some of the incompatible contingencies at work between those ideas. So why do they clash, basically? What are some of the things that clash between two different opposing isms?